Hello and welcome to Champ Select, your go-to competitive Legends of Runeterra podcast. I'm Alex. As per usual, joining me are Noble.
Sup?
And Hugh.
Hello.
Today we're going to be going over some of the Zoe spoilers pretty briefly, and then we're going to be going into our main topic for the episode, which is card evaluation. And we're going to wrap it up with some viewer-submitted questions at the end of the episode. Real quick, it is worth noting that we are recording this episode on Friday, December 11th. Friday, December 11th, due to me and Noble going out of town for the holidays here this coming Sunday. So we're going to briefly go over spoilers, and the episode's going to be posted later next week,
Probably
after Wednesday or Thursday, probably after the expansion has released. So unfortunately, obviously we can't go into the future and look at Riven or anything like that, but we're going to be hopefully giving an exciting episode regardless of the fact that the new expansion will be out around then. So
Totally.
now that we got through that, I think we want to start off with some of the new spoilers, right?
Sure.
Really briefly go into, we got Zoe today,
Yeah.
obviously, and we've seen a couple new landmarks. So I don't know, I can't think of a better place to start than Zoe. So
What were we predicted things about Zoe last episode.
yeah, we could cash in half of the bets.
nailed it, Alex and I. Right.
Yeah.
I said over 3.
You said over 3.5. I think.
Alex and I both said 2.
Either 2 or 1.
Yeah.
But yeah, 1 makes sense. Now that I think about it, I don't know why I thought Zoe was going to be like a 3-5. It makes sense that she's like a little elusive 1-1.
That makes more sense to me.
She is a
for
small
sure.
child.
Small child that does way too much damage.
I should know mid laner champions are never cost more than like 4 mana.
Aurelion Soul, but whatever. All right, what's the actual card do, Hugh?
All right. So 1 mana, 1/1 elusive. Nexus Strike, create a, what is it called? Super cool star chart in hand.
Super cool.
All right. So super cool star chart
Super cool.
is a 2 mana burst spell that says invoke a celestial card that costs 3 or less. Basically the trigger that
Spacey Sketcher has, which
Yes.
is one of those cards we
Correct.
mentioned as being a Zoe card.
Yep, exactly. And she levels up, or let's see, yeah. Oh, if you already have a super cool star chart in hand, it just reduces its cost by 1 instead.
That's a big deal,
You
yeah.
don't get a second copy
It's
of the
also
card.
notably not fleeting. So the thing
Yes.
that she creates is not fleeting, so you don't have to cast it immediately.
Yeah. And she levels up when she has seen you play 10 cards with 10 different names. So she needs to be in play the whole time.
And
Yeah.
survive as a 1/1.
Yeah.
So I think that this champion is not going to, I don't think it's a hot take, it's not going to level up very often. It's 10.
Yeah.
It's 10.
My
So much.
God.
What's the flip better win the game, right?
The flip says, for the rest of the game, when you summon an ally, grant its keywords to all allies. So, like, not like...
All elusives are
It's
all
not
weird.
You win the game, but I mean...
It's
Very
really
powerful,
good,
yeah.
I
That's
think.
incredibly powerful. Like, if your board gets elusive when you drop an elusive, that's pretty...
Especially if you're doing all the invoke stuff where you can play the the 9 mana thing with
Everything
elusive,
that had-
overwhelm, and spell shield or
Yeah,
whatever.
I would like to correct myself from last episode. Spell Shield is actually a random keyword that you can get, and so it should work for Zoe. Because
cool.
Spell Shield is one of the little icons that's on the card, as opposed to Barrier, which isn't,
not.
I don't think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting. Does Green Fang Warden not have the little barrier thing? That's
Maybe he
that's
does.
the 3 mana 2/2 with Scout and Barrier,
But I
right?
think,
It has the little
I think something to do with
icon.
Barrier being for the end of the round and Spell Shield being permanent means that those cards can grant Spell Shield, but not
Interesting.
Barrier.
Well, anyway, so and then is there any other text on Zoe's Nexus Strike when she's flipped or anything, or is it just the permanent thing?
So her Nexus Strike changes from create a super cool star chart to create a Behold the Infinite that costs 0.
Which is
the 2
go ahead.
mana
burst invoke
Yeah. So
with
she
no
just
restriction,
basically, whenever she hits you, you
she's
get
going
to
to
invoke
invoke
for free.
which is really good.
Yes.
All right, so I don't think that this card is very good. Unfortunately, I think she's really cool, but a 1 mana 1/1 is just like, man, there's go hard. It just dies to everything. I
okay.
mean,
Yes, but how often are you able to kill Teemo?
That's fair. It does depend on the deck. And to be honest, I think this card's better than Teemo.
I agree completely.
So there could be an opening here. I think if you are like on the play on turn 1 and you play it on turn 1 and hit your opponent with it, you're going to be happy even if it gets killed later.
Yeah, because it drew a card.
Because it drew a card, right? And
Created a card.
Yeah, and
Which is notable for like random augment.
for sure. And you can draw multiple cards, right? If you on turn 1 play it, hit them, turn 2 cast a thing, turn 3 hit them, make another thing. Like you can accrue some real value in the early game. The problem is I'm not sure what the best way to convert that early advantage is into a win, because like, is our plan going to be to pile up early damage to kind of help with the fact that we have, this 1-mana 1/1 elusive, or are we just going to use Zoe as like a bridge to scale into the mid game where we're trying to win with a powerful invoke end game anyway? I think the real question for me is Zoe going to be able to efficiently bridge that gap between turn 1 and like turn 6 or 7 in the invoke decks, or is she going to be an aggressive card? I don't really know.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I do think it is worth noting that if you look at the celestial units, as far as her flip side, all of them except the 2-drop one have a keyword or multiple, because it starts with overwhelm. Oh, sorry, it starts with a 0-mana 2/1 that has Challenger.
Yep.
Then there's a 1-mana with Overwhelm. The Messenger does not have one, the 2-mana one, but the 3-drop has Elusive. The 4-drop
just invokes.
So
I guess that one wasn't.
The 4-drop invokes. Yeah.
The 5-drop has Challenger.
The 5-drop has Challenger. The 6-drop has Elusive and Lifesteal.
That one's good.
And then the 7-drop has Overwhelm and Barrier.
Start getting spell shields around then. Yeah.
Except the 8-1 again does have Elusive, but doesn't have Spell Shield. And then the 9 and 10-drop, the 10-drop also has Challenger but no Spell Shield, and the 9-drop has Spell Shield, Elusive,
and Overwhelm, right?
No,
just Spell Shield, Elusive.
Yeah, it's
the 10-drop gives everything else +2/+2 and Overwhelm.
and Challenger, and doesn't have Spell Shield.
Got it. All right. It's hard to keep track. Regardless, I think the flip side of the card is like insane, and like hit somebody invoke for free, like you're just gonna win the game.
Yeah, I just wanted to make the point, like you said, it won the game, and it reads as something that needs other cards once it's flipped to win the game, but that's not entirely true.
Yeah, I don't think
it's
that's
doing
true.
the invoking.
It's gonna do it itself.
Yeah.
It is an engine in and of itself. Even if your cards have 0 keywords in your whole deck, the card's still gonna be insane if you hit your opponent with it. And the like invoke for free thing is just insane.
Yeah.
So there's something I want to note about that might definitely affect the playability of Zoe, and that is that the 2-mana spell, I forget what it's called, but 2-mana slow +0/+2 and Spell Shield.
Moon Glow, Moon Shield,
something like that. Moon something
is one of the ones that it's an evoke.
It's 2-mana +0/+2.
So you're gonna be able to see that off of Spacey Sketcher and Zoe's star chart.
That is a big deal, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So there's and then we also have. So when I first read this card, my first thought was that I suddenly get to be excited to build a deck that wants to be playing the 3-drop 2/2 that grants +1/+1 and Spell Shield if you behold a Celestial card.
Okay.
Giddy Sparkologist, that's the one.
Yeah.
So we have Zoe, we have Spacey Sketcher, we have Giddy Sparkologist, we have Bastion, we have Targon's a bunch of buffs.
Figure, Pale Cascade.
Okay.
Right. And then
we just play it like Delver of Secrets, it's.
Yeah. I was thinking. So in the Lee Zed deck, I have frequently won the game with just a souped up Mountain Goat. Many times.
And Zoe's just going to be much better than that.
Zoe's going to be better than that. And one of the other spoilers we have, as one of the things that made me think about this, is 2-mana 1/2 elusive lifelink or lifesteal called Sparklefly.
That card's like a super power creeped Kinku Lifeblade, I think.
Yes.
It's 2 mana less for only 1 power. And granted, the power is a big deal, especially when it's elusive and lifesteal. But I think this card is markedly better than Kinku Lifeblade.
That makes sense. I want to talk this card in relationship to one of my pet decks, which is a listener question that we have later. So I'll wait on that. But I will say that I've been experimenting with Targon Elusives, and that it is an interesting archetype for sure. I think that we should talk a little bit about Zoe's other cards.
Briefly here.
There's
her champ spell is Sleepy Trouble Bubble, as expected. Stun an enemy, slow, 2 mana, stun an enemy, create a fleeting Paddle Star in hand. Shuffle a Zoe into your deck. And Paddle Star is a 3-mana slow spell that says deal 4 to an enemy that attacked this round or is stunned.
I think the Paddle Star is a good card, and I think the Sleepy Trouble Bubble is a bad card. That does make the Paddle Star, but that's a lot of
That's a lot of
mana over 2
Yeah.
priorities to be able to fully deploy that.
I don't love it.
Yeah,
I don't love the slow. I don't love the champ spell. I think it's gonna be fine some games when you have the extra Zoe. But I don't think I'm going to put
I think you
Sleepy
might
Trouble Bubble in my deck just as a card.
not.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I do think it is 2 different spell names to flip your Zoe,
which is nice.
but I still think a lot of the time it might be worth just keeping a backup in case it's killed.
Me too. It'll be good sometimes. Obviously, every champ spell has its moment, but I'm not super excited about this one.
It's worth noting that Zoe's whole package works really well with Augment and Victor because there's just so many things that create. Like, she invokes, she creates a card in her hand when she strikes. Spell Thief, another thing that was spoiled today.
Can we talk
creates a
about
card.
Spell Thief really quick? I think that is the best card that got spoiled today.
Interesting.
Oh, yeah. 1 mana burst, pick one of 3 enemy spells played this game and create a copy in hand.
Yeah, so
I like that card.
that
I think
reads
this card
as
I
you
love
look
that
at
card.
you look at a spread of 3 of if your opponent has cast 5 spells
you will look
It'll
at
pick
3
3
chosen
mana.
randomly,
and then pick one.
and then
Yes.
you pick one. Yeah, correct. So it's going to be
very
like
similar-
Invoking.
Or similar to, Invoking. I was going to say Discover.
From Hearthstone, but yeah, it's going to be very similar to Invoking. It's going to show you 3 options, and I think the most interesting part about this spell is that it's only 1 mana and it's burst. So you're going to be able to very reliably almost choose what opponent spell you want to see, as long as it's early enough in the game, right?
Yeah,
like
as long as you're tracking, paying close attention.
as long as you think about what spells your opponent has cast, you can pretty consistently snag exactly what you want.
And 1 mana burst is so easy to
So
fit into a
cheap,
turn.
yeah,
it's
and
just so easy.
You can, if you know that you're going to want Vengeance later in a game or whatever, it'll be nice to cast it early enough that you're guaranteed to get a Vengeance before your opponent has cast their 4th, 5th, 6th spell, etc., and then just be able to hang on to it because the 1 mana is so cheap. I think the card's going to be really hard, but I really think that it's quite good and very powerful, and I'm really looking forward to playing with
so
it.
it says played. So if I play a spell and then my opponent casts Deny and puts it on the stack and I respond with this, can I find that Deny?
Ooh, no
Because
clue.
that would be really, really
No
good.
idea.
No clue.
I don't know when the game reads played.
I
Yeah,
think
me
that it
neither.
is likely
I
that
think you can probably,
Because play
if I was
on
to guess.
creatures is when you as a cast trigger. So
Yeah.
it could be that when you put it into play and it hasn't resolved yet, it's still the game.
Yeah, because
allows
Ezreal
it.
Flipside
Yeah.
says resolve, right?
It does, and
Do
I
they
think
use the terminology resolve?
I don't think they use the actual term resolve. Though I know that if you counter a Mystic Shot, it's not going to you. I don't think.
Yeah, that is true with Ezreal.
Yeah.
But I'll look up the word that is. So there's also a good amount of other spoilers from other regions we should talk
Yeah,
about.
we'll come back.
So
to
we
that.
kind of started on today for us, and so there have been the past 2 days since we recorded our last episode.
Yeah, let's
So let's talk about those.
talk briefly about our favorites. The landmarks, I think, in particular, we wanted to go over.
Yeah.
And the landmark removal spells are pretty neat.
Yeah,
Yeah. All right. So I'll just go back. I'll go back in time day by day. I
sounds
guess.
perfect.
Yeah. So
We time travel on this podcast.
let's see.
We are
So-
currently taking you back in time when you're listening this to
A week from now.
Friday. And then now from here we're traveling back even further.
So the landmarks from yesterday, we'll focus on the landmarks. If there's anything we want to say about the other cards, we'll mention it. But first, we'll look at Demasia's landmark, where they didn't have one before, right?
I believe that this is the first one.
Yeah. So the Grand Plaza, 3 mana. When an ally is summoned, give it +1/+1 and Challenger this round.
Torn on this one. It really only has text every other turn. The +1/+1 could matter when you're blocking, but odds are not really. But I do think it's quite good on the turns where you do have the attack token. However, I think a lot of the Demacia based decks are already built around having really good units with Challenger, just that have Challenger innately. I mean, cards like Screeching Dragon, Fiora, that type of thing. The decks are already built around having Challenger, so I think you would need a different deck. Probably, I think that the best deck for this card would be like Elites with like Battlesmith and Garen and, Vanguard Bannerman and all that stuff, where the cards just actually don't have Challenger innately, really. Because a lot of Demasia's good units already have Challengers, so you're basically going to have to take those good units with Challenger out and put in just more stats, probably, and hope that it lines up.
This is the time that I think that I want to bring in what the topic of the rest of our episode is going to be, which is how to evaluate cards, because I think it's really important with this specific card.
Yeah, please.
And one of the ways is trying to envision the play patterns that are going to happen with this card. So this card really only does anything, in my opinion, on outside of very fringe cases, on turns in which you have the attack token.
For sure.
So, like, it will make your guys a little bigger to be able to block, and we all know how annoying it is to, like, try to play a unit pre-combat, and then they play, like, Solari Shieldbearer, and this will do a similar thing where it's going to make their creature, like, bigger than yours.
But it also cannot influence open attacks.
Yeah. So basically, it can't influence open attacks.
And when your opponent has this in play, it's going to be very obvious that your open attack gets much better so that they can't trigger it.
Yes. And also, it is bad with your own open attacks, because if you have this in play, you need to develop units before you can attack, because you want to actually get value out of the card you're playing. Card. And it makes those attacks really awkward, especially on like turn 4 when your opponent could play any number of, like, they could have Vengeance. Later in the game, they could have Runation. Like, if you decide to play 2 units before attacking with this landmark in play, and then you get ruinated, it's
a disaster. Yeah, I'm off this card, I think, after hearing that.
Mostly in agreement. It's just, all I'm going to say is this card's, for me personally, just a nightmare to evaluate. I have absolutely...
I'm going to play it in Expedition.
In Expedition, this card is insane.
I'm going to give my Radiant Guardians
One thing
Challenger.
about this game is there is not as big of a difference between what's good in Expedition and what's good in Constructed as there is in games like Magic.
Yeah, where
for example, Alpha Wildclaw is like very good in Expedition, and also it turns out just like very well positioned and constructed, like right now, where just like a beefy body is just like good. And I think that comes down to a lot of the cards in this game just being generally like pretty good. It's not like Magic where there are commons that are like literally awful, and then there are rares that are very, very good, and there's a lot more. All of the cards are like playable.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like there's any cards that are like absolutely atrocious in this game.
So real quick, I want to talk about play versus cast. Ezreal, Lee Sin, and stuff like Eye of the Dragon all say cast, and I believe that means that the spell needs to quote-unquote resolve. It needs to be put on the stack and then not have its target removed or be denied or notified, whereas Karma says when you play. So that seems to me like you probably can't get denied. I could see it working such that you could.
No, I think
that means you do get deny because play is when you put it onto the stack.
But this card says cast.
This
card says
the 1 mana burst one says cast.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I agree.
Play.
All right, so it will have had to have already done the thing.
Just to be absolutely clear, the 1 mana burst spell, the spells you can get are spells that have resolved, not just been played.
Likely. Again, this game is pretty new. Sometimes it still has weird rules interaction. For example, that elusive we were just comparing to Kinku Lifeblade. If you look at the card, the position of the lifesteal and elusive symbols are swapped. It's just funny. There's like sometimes irregularities.
That's kind of funny.
To that, like they don't have a way that they always code it. Which one comes first?
Of note, do you guys think that means if a spell gets countered, that you then will not be able to find it?
That is my understanding. Yes.
Yeah, because what happens when a spell is countered is the little icon that was the spell when you put it on the stack, like
fizzles,
like does the little obliterate.
Yeah, does it like obliterate itself?
Which is what happens when you like remove the target of Mystic Shot,
sure,
glimpse or whatever.
All right.
So I think that you probably will not be able to get those.
All right, interesting enough.
That's where I'm at.
Cool. Next one, Hugh.
Yeah, the other landmark we had for yesterday was Targon's Peak. 5 mana. Round start. Reduce the cost of a random card in each player's hand to 0 this round. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that I think this card is, unless it's broken, I think it's going to be bad.
Yeah,
I think it's just card.
For sure.
I think this card's just not going to be good.
Yeah, on turn 5, I'm not really that interested in making my expensive stuff costs 0. Even in the decks that are playing huge things repeatedly, there's always just going to be random misses that you have in your hand because you have to play removal spells or cheap things for curve reasons. I mean, this card could just lose you the game on turn 6 if you're playing even close to a mirror-ish, or if your opponent just has Captain Farron in their hand, you know, on turn 5 against Pirate, on turn 6 against Pirates, and then you give them a 0-mana Captain Farron, and it doesn't even really matter what you hit, right? Like,
Yeah,
you're
like-
just gonna die.
There's so many things they could get. There's things you could not get. Also, this card's best when your entire hand is normally uncastable. Like, that
Yeah,
seems-
that's just not a place where I want to be. I'd rather just play the 3-mana ramp spells or Catalyst. I would much rather play Catalyst of Aeons than
Yeah.
this card. And I understand they're in different
Isn't
regions,
this
but
card
still.
5 mana?
Yeah,
too?
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
Catalyst. Yeah,
I mean, but Catalyst can be played on turn 3, and this card has to be played on
That
turn
is
5.
true.
Which is a huge deal too.
That is a
if I
huge
could play this
difference.
card on turn 3, then
I think this card would be insane.
I'd probably be
Yeah.
in. Yeah.
Yeah.
But turn 5 is just a little too late. I think the tempo I think the tempo catch up, quote unquote, that it's going to get you is not going to be enough to save you from the 5-mana tempo loss that you had to spend to play
I
the
do
card.
think, like, if we just, like, think about the decks that are in this format, like, I don't care about making Mistwraith's cards cost less very much. Like, even a 0-mana Harrowing is, like, not that bad because it's filling up their board anyway. And that's their most expensive sell. Like, giving them a 0-mana Atrocity is quite bad, but most of the other things are only saving them, like, 2 to 3 mana. And I think similar things are true. I think this is really bad in an Invoke Mirror.
Oh, yeah,
where you're
obviously.
both
Heinous.
invoking giant cards, like, because if they just luck out, then
Yeah, you're just coin flipping the game,
yeah,
basically.
you're gonna make your, like,
Do you imagine playing this on turn 5 and then your opponent slams Ace Soul? No thanks.
yeah, yeah. But I do think, like, Pirate Burn. Okay, that deck is sometimes constrained on mana.
And they
Yeah,
have
the more I
Captain
talk about it,
Farron.
the more I'm off it. Yeah.
What if you just take Captain Farron? Yeah, like
Captain
a lot of the
Farron
aggro
or
decks play
GP
Captain Farron.
or Jack the Winner,
Yeah.
or a Decimate.
Yeah, that's fair.
Even Decimate is great. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
if they hit it.
Noxian Fervor, Zap Sprayfin. Like,
Yeah, okay. I'm.
there's a
will
lot of
say,
good
yeah.
hits.
There's a
yeah,
lot of gas.
It's pretty easy to curate your hand in this game, such that you don't really have
that's true.
if you don't really have low cost cards in your hand, but that happens for that happens for them too. That's a
Yep.
mirrored. It's a mirrored effect. So yeah, I agree, and I think it is probably less. It's more abusable, but will probably be worse, but has a much bigger downside than the both players draw. And I think the both players draw is both costs less mana, will fit and will fit into your curve better, and I think is going to probably be better than this card.
All right, what's the next one?
Do we want to go straight to the previous day's landmarks?
I think so.
What else was in this day?
It's kind of unfortunate. There's some really, really sweet cards. That
Okay,
I,
well, yeah,
talk
if
about
you
them.
want to talk
Yeah.
about
Okay.
a few,
We got time.
real quick.
5 mana. Oh, so Moonlight Affliction. 5 mana
yeah, that
burst.
card's worth talking about.
Silence 2 enemy units this round. Nightfall. They can't block.
That is very good.
It's
a
terrifying.
burst spell too, right?
Yeah.
Horrifying. It's like imagine the turn against Mithrace and they like
Yeah, Risen Mist's Moonlight Affliction kill you.
yeah, like
And I know that's a lot of mana, but you know that they could do that on the same turn they could cast the Harrowing, and it's going to be a lot better than the Harrowing sometimes.
yeah, most of the time honestly, I think.
Yeah. You don't even need Nightfall, because sometimes this just acts defensively as like a double Hush of what Hush used to be when it made copies of itself in your hand.
Yeah, and the Hush and just having Hush effects is good.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
it's a nuts combat
It's
trick.
followers, right? It's not champion. Can it hit champions?
It can hit
I think
champions.
it can. It's just this
my.
turn, right?
This card is
So, like-
Shadow Isles?
It is Targon.
Just
Okay,
Targon,
thank
right?
God.
Yeah,
I was like, we
it's-
don't need this effect in
No,
Shadow
no,
Isles.
it's
That would be way
Targon
too
for
good.
sure.
That would be
But
nuts, yeah.
yeah, I think the card's great,
To be
and I
fair,
expect it
Mithrace
to see
is
play.
already on Targon. Like they're
Yeah.
at.
Oh, they'll play it.
Yeah, they'll play
I think
it.
they'll play some number.
I think they'll definitely play it.
Card has huge blowout potential.
All right. Anything else we want to go over from that day, or straight?
thought- Oh,
There's a lot of sweet cards, man.
There's so
we
many
can't
sweet
we can't
cards.
talk about all of
We
them,
can't talk about all of them,
unfortunately.
especially because by the time we get to this,
Yeah,
the cards
but-
will be out. People will be playing with them.
For sure. We'll have a very good idea how obnoxious Moonlight Affliction is by the time this episode goes
That's
live.
true.
So, everybody give us your best Moonlight Affliction stories.
I do think when this episode is live, the patch will not be live because I think it goes live a week from today.
Okay. Well, then, great.
Okay.
Anyway. So next, let's go for Monastery of Harana, the Ionia landmark.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Round start, create a Sanctuary in hand. 3 mana. Round start, create a Sanctuary in hand. So Sanctuary is a 1 mana burst spell However, notably, it has the same text as Gems, where you cannot play it if there's anything else on the stat. You can't play it in response to anything. It's just a 1 mana burst spell that you can play. Recall an ally. That's it.
This card sucks. I have nothing good to say about this card.
Yeah.
All right, next.
I think that we can make this card good, and I don't think that we should try. Like, I think we could build a deck in which this card is powerful.
Yeah,
and I don't think that.
and I don't wanna
think
play that deck.
That deck is unlikely to be good.
Yep,
And
I agree.
you know what? There could easily be something we're just not something huge we're missing here, and we're not
Yeah,
thinking
maybe
about
that.
it.
Maybe I'm gonna get clipped for that one later, but
is
I'm
the
pretty
kind of
willing
card-
to say that this card's unplayable.
This is the kind of card that, like, if it's good, we would have to spend like an hour perusing the list of cards in this game, and we'd be like, oh,
Yeah, and I don't think there's any way to think that this card, like, I don't think there's any real way to gauge exactly how good that deck would be just from looking at the list. Like, I think you'd have to play it too to really to really realize if
we
the
have to
things
see
you're
where the
doing are
meta
powerful
lands.
enough.
Like, there's just so many factors outside of the card itself that determines if this card's
All right,
good.
I'm
So-
off it. Give me
The other,
what
the
do we
other
got?
landmark for this day is for Freljord. It says, so it's 3 mana, called the Scar Grounds. When an ally survives damage, grant it +1/+0 and tough.
All right, now this one I think is quite a bit better.
Yeah.
This is kind of terrifying.
This one's got some real text,
yeah,
for sure.
because tough is just such a strong keyword in this game.
And it's not until end of turn, right? It just gets tough.
Yeah, it just has it +1/+0 and tough indefinitely. Like, it just gets that from now on. So that's
Yeah, I think it's really good. It's +1/+0, right?
+1/+0. It's
Yeah, it
not
doesn't
full-
give the HP back. That would be insane. I think this card's good. I'm not sure if it's going to see play. I think it's going to be a nice card for Freljord to have to attack the meta at any given point. You know,
Tough
if
is
the
a
damage-based
very,
removal.
very powerful keyword.
Yeah,
And
if
not a lot of
damage-based
things
removal
give it-
becomes too good, you can just play some big things in this thing and just like
Yeah.
watch your opponents struggle to ever kill
So-
anything.
so
Maybe Vlad will finally be playable.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
maybe.
a thing that so I think that we should continue weaving in our topic for the day, which is how to evaluate cards, and
Yes.
a really important thing. And we've talked about this before previously, but in Legends of Runeterra there are batches of cards that usually surround a champion. We talked about how Zoe's batch just had a bunch of like invoke stuff, ways to create cards, which works with Victor that has all this augment and other ways to create cards. So there are 3 little batches to think about for this card. They are Vladimir and the Crimson units in Noxus.
Yep.
Who all have effects when they survive damage, which both when you're playing effects that let them survive damage, this card triggers, and then the tough helps them survive damage in the future. So it is very good with those cards.
Yep.
It is very good with there's like
Scarthane
the Braum
cards.
package with
Yeah, I
all the
think
when
that's
I
the Braum
survive.
one.
Yeah, it's
when I
the
survive
Braum,
damage.
and then Scarthane Stefan, the 1 mana 0/3, and
Scar Mother Vryrna.
yeah, and like Tarzak the Tribeless kind of fits in there. It's like
Yes,
the
for
5
sure.
mana 5/8 that on attack deals 1 to all battling things.
Yeah.
And then the last one the last one is actually, in my opinion, it's Tom Kench's batch. I think being able to play the cards that damage themselves when they
Interesting.
enter with this card is very good because it makes your Crusty Codgers a 3/2 tough for 1 mana. It makes your Lounging Lizard become a 4/3 and then get +1 power and only take 1 damage every turn. You do have to play. You don't get to play Targon then with those cards, so it is harder to heal them. But Freljord does have an amount of ways to heal things.
Yeah, you can play Kindly Tavern Keeper.
Yeah.
Also, they I think all of their combat tricks, or most of them,
Buff toughness.
toughness,
For
yeah.
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Which does the same thing if you don't care about the actual text healing happens, which is things that Targon cares about. So I do think that it is good with those cards.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I also think that this card could just see play
Oh, it's so good with
as
Braum too.
as just a good card too. Like, you know, I mentioned it being like a sweet meta thing, but like also this card should just go into your deck and just be a good value card that you can play and just make your opponent's life much more difficult. So I'm not certain that this card will see play, but I will not be shocked if it does.
Well, because think about it like Starspring, like your opponent's creatures being able to kind of like outgrind you even as a fair card, like where you can't trade up into them, you can't leave them alive at little health, you have to kill them all out. It doesn't win the game like Starswing does, but it does continually buff those creatures and then make them even harder to continue killing. So I think this card is very good, and I'm really excited to play with it.
Same. That's pretty much where I'm at. I think we should probably move on.
From spoilers?
Yeah.
There are two more that I think
two more that you want to talk about?
Okay.
So in yesterday's, there were some Shadow Isles cards, and there were a couple bad, in my opinion, ephemeral cards that I don't think we need to talk about, but I want to talk about the Solari Sunforger card, the 4 mana 5/4 Daybreak, give me lifesteal this round.
That was one of the cool cards that I said
And in Targon. So one, this card is a Daybreak card, so it's good with Leona. I also think it's really important. This card is 4 mana, which is not that much, and is a really, really good at bridging a mid game into an invoke late game. It is so good at both being an overstated creature, which that deck already has a lot of, with like Ravens and Leonas and stuff, and then also like against an aggro deck, like healing back
5
to
is
20.
a lot.
5 life is so many.
Yeah,
so,
just think about how unbeatable Tasty Fey Folk feels sometimes against.
Yeah, and
much
this card
better
has a
than
ton
that.
of toughness. Yeah, and like if you can do something where you set up a block and also play single combat, which this deck is already playing, which this is the pet deck that I'm going to talk about a little later, but like which an Ace-Soul Leona deck is already playing because it's good with the other Daybreak cards. Like
I think the
Solari
Invoke
Shield
decks are getting
Bearer.
a big boon this patch.
Yeah, yep. So then the other thing that I want to talk about is Captain Erika, which is
that was the other card
yeah.
that I was thinking.
I figured, and I think it's just worth talking about. So
That's fair.
It's an 8 mana 6/6 with Spell Shield, importantly, and play, capture a unit or landmark. So this is like, for Magic players, this is like the biggest, hardest to kill Banisher Priest of all time. Like it is a thing that, so it captured it, so it's going to take that off the board until it dies, and it is both hard to kill because it's a 6/6 and because it has Spell Shield.
Yeah.
It's good. 8 mana is a lot, so I'm not sure if it's going to see play strictly because of the mana cost.
Okay, but
I am-
Vengeance, while a spell, you can use spell mana to cast it. Vengeance is 7.
it's true, but you can cast it on turn 4.
That
That is
is
a big,
yeah, and
big difference.
That is a big difference.
You know, 8
but
mana
still.
creatures you don't see that many of them. I mean, the ones that come to mind are like, like things in the Invoke deck, Tryndamere.
I think that's mostly because most 8 mana creatures are not, their stat line or their effect is not worth their mana cost, where 9 is marginally so much better, like Commander Ledros
Okay.
and stuff like that. Like that's,
Do you think this is an exception to that rule? Do you think this card's good enough?
I think this card will be good enough. It's hard to say, but I think this card's going to be playable.
Yeah, you obviously can't play 3, but like,
Oh yeah, it'd probably be
it is
2 of.
it is really a high tempo play that is
have a
quite
thing
good.
that reduces the cost of elites? Maybe I'm crazy. It has sometimes plays mobilize, which is not a good card.
There's the one. There's a 4 mana 3/3 elite that costs 1 less every
There's
time
nothing
you play
that
an elite.
makes this cost less. There's
I see.
the
Yeah.
elite that makes itself cost less, and then there's the other card that costs less when a elite gets played, and then whenever a unit
It
dies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good when units die and elites.
Yeah,
make
it does a
cost less.
thing, but yeah. And then I also think that I do think that we should talk about Wiggly Burblefish because it's the card I've seen the most talk about in the community.
That's fair. Yeah.
So this is a 6
This card is sweet.
mana elusive 3/1 that says reduce my cost by 1 for each spell you've cast this game in Bilgewater, and it says when I'm summoned, create a 1-cost spell from your regions in hand. So this is cool because it's support for like the Fizz archetype that I think Bilgewater was maybe lacking a little of. It's going to be very good in those decks that we've talked about before that try to use Starlit Seers, cheap spells, and like Teemo or Fizz. I guess you can only play it in the Fizz version, but I do still think that that's good. Both creating a spell and then coming down as early as like turn 3 sometimes is, I think, quite powerful.
Yeah, I think that card's good, and we'll see play. 0 mana, just creatures in general, have always been very good in every other card game. I'm a little bit less confident that 0 mana cards will be good. 0 mana creatures with like kind of all right bodies will be great in this game, just because I think a lot of the spell mana really helps to deal with the mana problems or the like double spelling that makes it so effective in the other card games. But I'll have to be proved at that point. For now, I'm going to assume that free creatures are going to be good in this card game.
Yeah, that seems reasonable.
Yeah. Do we want anything else, or do we want to move on to card evaluation?
I think we should
in
each,
general.
Yeah, I think maybe we can each maybe take turns talking about like how we feel about card evaluation in general, and then kind of try to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think it's important to start with the fact that obviously none of us are experts, and I don't think anyone is an expert at card evaluation in this game. So this is really going to be more of an open discussion about what we think we're looking for and why. And I don't think any of us have a really solid idea of what makes a card good in this game yet, but hopefully by the end of this, 20-minute conversation or whatever, we all have a better idea.
Yeah, so I would like to start with asking, like you, Hugh and Alex, when you look at a full set for a spoiler, so when you look at all of the new cards that are being introduced to an environment, what kind of things are you thinking about?
So first thing I usually look at is like the raw power of the cards. Are these cards efficient for their mana cost? Are their stats good if they're creatures? Is their effect good if they're a spell? That's the first thing. It's just straight up, is this card good? Does it have a powerful effect? Just as simply as looking at, the Targon card. Is this card good? Does it have a powerful effect? And not really. Or, even for example, Zoe's champion spell that we talked about a little bit earlier, Sleepy Trouble Bubble and Paddle Star. Is this card good? Does it have a powerful effect? Is it on rate? I would say that card is not that good because of the rate. I think that the effect costs too much mana. So, and like the 2 priority thing is a big deal. So like those are the initial things that I'm looking for is this creature efficient? Does it have enough stats, abilities, keywords to make it good for its mana cost? Is this spell efficient? Does it have enough stats, keywords, abilities for its mana cost, essentially? Next, I look at synergy, and this usually revolves around the champions that I'm trying to build around in this game. So, be it Victor, Zoe, or some of the older cards.
To select, you could say?
Yes, which champs to select, for instance. And is it worth building around the champions? So, when I think about this, I think of, for example, Draven. Draven is not really a card that you're ever building around. Like, you can put it in your aggressive deck, it's good. You can put it in your mid-range deck, it's good. And you do as much as, like, put some rummages in, right? And like the Ezreal Draven deck, because you want to be able to discard the axes, and you're getting some value, but Draven is not
That's funny, because I was actually going to
deck or what's built around, right?
I was actually going to talk about Draven as an example of a champion that you can build around in neat ways. So it's cool that we
but at current it's really not. Whereas when I think about let's say, for example, Leona, right? If you're putting Leona in your deck, you're usually accompanying it with enough Daybreak units to flip it and have it be a plan, right? Or Fiora. Fiora is the biggest example, I think, and Shen, right? Like, Fiora is the plan with your deck, whereas Draven is not the plan with your Draven Ezreal deck, right?
Ezreal is a lot more of your plan.
Ezreal's much more of your plan, right?
Ezreal's the thing you build around. You put cards in your deck because they're good with Ezreal, because they work with Ezreal.
Correct. And Draven's just here for value. So, I want to establish whether I'm trying to build a high synergy deck or just a good stuff deck. And then I look at, can I build this high synergy deck? Do the high synergy cards meet my bar of these cards are good enough to play? And kind of go from there. And usually I do all of those calculations in my head in, 3 seconds after reading the card. You just really quickly run through stuff, and that's, I think, where your like gut feeling of whether or not the card is good or not comes.
And that can really get upended when people tell you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can change your mind immediately, right? Like, we saw that happen like last week when we talked about counterfeit copies or whatever.
It was the 2-drop burst spell that makes a copy of a thing, right?
Yes.
Iterative improvement.
That's
Thank
the
you.
one.
Nailed it.
That's the one. Good job, Hugh. And yeah, so like, like I said, like my initial thought with that card is like, I read it and I'm like, power level's not super high. I'm kind of off it. And then he was like,
+1/+1 of
yeah,
stats
and then he was
great.
like, I mean, it's just like always the best thing on the board. And I was like, oh wow, like yeah, you're right. Like this card's great, So, but that's my initial gut reaction, I think. How about you, Hugh?
So both of those things, the first thing that you said, the just raw power,
the vanilla test,
exactly,
from
the vanilla
Magic.
test, like how big is the creature, how strong's the effect. Also, first thing I think of for sure. I do not immediately go for synergy next. I really like to look at how unique, because this card game is so new. I like to look at how unique an effect is and how many cards do the thing that this card does. A good example that we have now is Captain Erica. Nothing else really does that. There's no other creature that comes down. The closest parallel would be Tom Kench, I guess.
Like the Infinite Mind Splitter isn't a Horoid comparison, I think.
I guess, yeah, something like that. An 8-drop that lock something down, but even that doesn't take something from the board.
Correct. Yeah.
Especially because she also pulls a landmark too. Like she can just eat a landmark or a creature. So I guess what I'm going for here is redundancy. Like, is this card either something that's very common that'll make an existing deck much more consistent and therefore better, or is this card bringing something very new to the game that can bring about a whole new archetype
Yeah, and when I
deck?
when I think about that difference, I'm thinking cards like Risen Miss are pieces of the like redundant good effect that my deck wants
Mist Race
to
package.
do this. Yeah, the whole Mist Race package is just like filled with redundancy, or versus effects that do unique things that could spur different late games or different end games. Cards like Commander Ledros or Captain Erica, that type of stuff. Cards with unique effects.
Or like, for example, like Feel the Rush is like one that you're
definitely.
like, oh yeah. Or Go Hard. It's like a whole plan in and of itself.
A lot of the KDA cards are whole plans in themselves.
Yeah. Feel the Rush is interesting because it's like really similar to War Mother's Call. So it is in a way redundancy, but you're never going to play more
Both
than
of
3 of
them.
that effect.
Yeah, exactly.
So is that
That's most of what, other than, I mean, all of the things Alex said apply, but like those are, other than what he said, those are the things I think about.
Yeah,
and
so-
interestingly enough, I'll say this real quick and then go to you,
Yeah.
Noble. I think that the reason why I value synergy so highly in this game is actually because I think synergy is the most important in this game than I've seen in any of the other card games, especially for card evaluation. I think that is especially true in Expedition, but is probably why I carried that mindset over into Constructed. It feels like the synergy, like your deck just isn't going to be good if you don't have synergy because the cards are generally good.
Yeah.
So the synergy is really where you come up with a powerful plan that is better than just the sum of their parts.
Yeah.
Go
So
ahead.
I think I have a couple things that I want to add. The first is I want to continue this talk about redundancy. It's really important, and it's something that I, as a card game player, undervalued for a really long time. But think about, I'm going to use Magic as an example. Think about the amount of times a new card is released, and then a new deck becomes playable in an eternal format that is something. That is 8 of a something. Like we call it the deck 8 rack because they printed a new effect that was the same as an effect of the rack that was powerful, but when there were only 4 of them in the deck, you weren't drawing it consistently for it to be good. But when they presented a different card that did something very similar, that deck becomes powerful. The easiest example of this card being of this being true is spells that do direct damage to the face. If there are not that many of that card, their like Decimate is not that good, but the more ways you have to deal damage directly to your opponent, the better they are.
Absolutely.
And then that's true of Goblin Bushwhackers in Magic.
It's true of Lava Spikes and Lightning
lots of
Bolts
things.
and all that.
So in this game, for example, were Navori Conspirator and Greenglade Duo released at different times, I think you would have seen that because it's a powerful elusive 2-drop that beats down, and elusives was the best deck for a while. And I think that we would have seen, there's a new elusive card, and that deck would have suddenly become viable. It was viable for the whole time because they were both in the beginning set. But just
I think we
those kind of
did see
redundant
that
decks.
with Risen Miss.
Yeah,
actually,
we did.
Right.
We saw it
I think
with
we
Risen Miss.
literally saw that exact thing with
Because-
Risen Miss, where like there were Mist Wraith decks, but they it wasn't really the plan.
You had to play like Chronicler of Ruin, or Chronicler of, is that
Chronicler of Ruin and like Fading Memories
Yep,
and stuff like
exactly.
that. And then like you add the extra. Thankfully,
Risen
we
Miss
have
and Stalking Shadows.
Yeah, thankfully we have the 9th copy of thing that generates a.
And we also got Stalking Shadows at the same time, which does that, which bakes that into the card, is being able to do 2 of it.
Super good.
So
It
another
added
good-
a whole lot of consistency to that deck and brought it straight up into tier 1, basically.
Another thing is like Vile Feast versus Unspeakable Horror. I looked at Unspeakable Horror and I was like, I don't know if this is better than Vile Feast, but that was the wrong question because decks played 3 of both for a while, and having a critical amount of drain effects made 1 health units much worse and made the early game of decks like Feel the Rush for a while much better.
Absolutely. Then we saw Go Hard kind of tear
Go
that
Hard's
up a
kind of-
little
yeah,
bit, but
certainly.
regardless, a reasonable point.
Because it's redundancy of an effect in the same card.
Yeah.
Like, because it makes copies of itself. So then what I think about, too, is the first thing as a competitive player I think about is what established decks I want to put this card in. It's the easiest frame of reference to think about. So immediately thinking about, this new card with Daybreak can get played in these Leona decks that we know exist and we know are good. This, Targon card that does things with healing or damaging your units can go in.
Moonlight Affliction. We just
Yeah.
talked about just sliding that card into Mistrais and it
Yeah.
just probably being good. You
Yeah.
know, like
And
that card is not going
or-
to spawn an archetype, but
Yeah.
it is probably just going to be a good piece to an
And just
existing
really
one.
quickly, on that note, what card is it replacing? In that deck, are we playing a card we're not super thrilled about playing because we just don't quite have the effect we want? And that's another small thing to look at.
And like upgrades, side grades, and then things that tie synergy packages together. And then there are cards that you look at, and these are, in my opinion, as for me, are the hardest card to evaluate because they're going to spawn an entire new thing. Like I looked at Tahm Kench and I was like, this card is not that good. And then it turned out to be a pillar of one of the better decks in the format, Soraka Kench, because I wasn't able to envision how that deck would look and play and work out before actually playing with it or against it, because that amount of synergy, how hopeless it feels when they have a Star Spring in play and you just feel like you shouldn't ever attack. Stuff like that is just really hard to know that that's how it's going to work out before you build it.
It's
And
hard
nothing
to
like it existed prior
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, and it's really hard to sit there and be like, it'll be fine. What if I just point removal spells on it and then add it? And it's like, yeah, but like how can you do that? Like, what if they have Astral Protection and then you fizzle your removal spell essentially that dealt damage? They heal it 8 effectively, and then you can literally never win the game. Can you even cast the card? There's a lot of unknown factors, and I think we like kind of briefly went over that with Zoe, right? Because I think we like kind of established that like Zoe is probably not just going to be a slot in to an existing archetype. Like
I
if
don't wanna
Zoe's going to be good, she's going to be her own deck probably, which makes her hard to evaluate.
I am definitely putting one or two of her in my Targon midrange decks, because currently I'm playing less than the full 6 champions because I have 3 Leonas and 2 Asols, and I might replace 1 Asol with 2 Zoes.
That
Just to like lower my curve, and because I'm already looking for another champion to play there. So another example of this for me is Swain's batch of cards, because Noxus like was not have a ton of removal and play a mid-rangey game region. It was a very aggressive beatdown region for quite a while that mostly had units. And then we got Death's Hand, Noxian Fervor, Ravenous Flock, Swain, and the Leviathan all at the same time. And that made this whole new archetype of way to use a region possible. And that's another thing to be thinking about, is what regions is this card in, and like what does that region do, and does it pair well with other specific regions? Like the card that we're talking about that is like basically a smaller Kinku Lifeblade might mean a deck with that and Ionia stacking a bunch of buffs on either that or Kinku Lifeblade is good, and it is better than Kinku Lifeblade in that deck, but you still want to play Kinku Lifeblade
for the redundancy. Yeah.
Yep.
Card evaluation is super hard. I've never been super good at it in any card game I've played, to be honest. It's always been a bit that's been kind of hard. It's tough too, because you know, you have your opinions and your feelings on cards, and you know, you think to yourself like, this is what I think about this, but I'm usually bad at this, so am I wrong? And then you sit there and think about it more, and then you're like, I think I'm right, but I know I'm bad at it, so I don't know. You know, and so you start to second guess yourself, and especially with this game, like, it's so new. I mean, we all thought Twisted Fate was going to be bad. Like,
Yeah,
I thought
actually wanted to
Swain
talk
was going to
about
be
that.
bad.
I also thought Swain was gonna be bad.
All of these champions, I think all of the champions are good. I think that champions that looked bad on paper before ended up being good, and I said that I thought Zoe was kind of bad, but I'm more than willing to leave the door open here for Zoe, Victor, and those things, because in the past I've been shown that I think like pretty much every champion has been good except for like literally Vladimir, right? But like
Yeah,
I think that
just
Vladimir
Vladimir.
might be the literal only bad champion in the game.
Yeah.
And he might not be bad anymore,
Yeah, and he might be good again.
Because this new card is really good
this
with him.
new landmark is really good with him.
Yeah.
So I'm inclined to believe that the champions will be good.
Yeah.
But we'll
and
see.
so I wanted to talk a little bit more about champions. I think when evaluating champions, it's a whole different ballgame, because there's a lot of different kinds of champions in this game. There are cards like Heimerdinger, Ezreal, Karma, where you build your whole deck around making them good. And then there are cards like Draven, Elise,
Twisted
Fate, where they're just very solid on-rate cards. I think the reason that Twisted Fate initially looked bad to us
It's a 4-mana 2/2.
Yeah, it's a 4-mana
Yeah.
2/2, and even if it draws a card, you're like, I don't know if I want to be paying 4 mana for a 2/2 that draws a card. Especially because I think at the time we were looking at Twisted Fate, Shadow Assassin was still a 2/2 for 3 elusive that drew a card, and you're like, this card is obviously better.
Turns out that red card is real good.
Yeah,
we
red card
did,
is
we did
yellow card.
not
I think it was
estimate how good red card would
a
be.
problem not of like.
And also how it interacted with kegs. There were just a lot of things that are just
Yeah,
easy
that's
to
what I was
miss.
gonna say.
Yeah.
We underestimated kegs.
That's
Yeah.
probably very
That
true.
was definitely for me anyway.
I honestly read keg the first time, and I was like, oh, it has vulnerable and it can't block. I am off it. Like, you're just never going to actually have these stick around. And that ended up being,
It is a big factor about when you can play your keg cards.
Balanced.
But yeah,
I think it's very
you
balanced.
it turns out you can actually just play your keg cards after they attack or
So
whatever.
when evaluating a champion, you need to look like, is it like Trundle, where it's just a good mid-range card? Is it like Draven, where it's a good mid-range card? Or just, value card?
Is it like
It's
Jinx,
a good rate
where
card.
it's a good build-around card? Or,
Yeah. And then also, like, how are they leveling up? And part of this is how are they leveling up and what do they look like when they level up? Because, leveled Draven isn't as not nearly as game ending as leveled Jinx. Leveled Tryndamere is like you'd rather that all of them you played were unleveled because it's
Because you
using
want
a
two
level up
lives.
mechanic in an interesting way.
And I think that that's a pretty interesting dichotomy, and actually usually lines up very well with the actual, are they a value card that's just good, a good card on your deck and on rate, or are they your deck's plan? And that usually determines whether or not you care about leveling them up, right? Like, you don't care about leveling up Draven, but you really care about leveling up Ezreal. You don't care about leveling up Elise, but you really want to flip Jinx, right? Like, it really usually the champion your deck is trying to flip is your plan A, right? And the rest of the cards are surrounding it. And I've found that the most consistent way to win any game of Legends of Runeterra, regardless of format, is to flip the champion that's the best in your deck, right? Like, if you flip the champion that's best in your deck, you're probably going to win.
Yeah.
That's just generally been blanketly true, I've found, for almost every game.
That's actually a really good segue into one of the questions we got asked.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so let's go into...
I think one of them was what makes a deck good, right?
Yeah, that was from
And that's a good place to start.
Dr. Beeves on Twitter. He asked us, what makes a deck good?
And
What a question.
That's that one's a lot to unpack. So where do you want to start, Hugh?
So when you said the thing about having a plan A, that made me think of this because
that makes sense. Yeah.
one of the two things that I think of first, I guess it's three things. It's simplicity, redundancy, and what's the last?
What you said, simplicity,
Redundancy
Power?
and
Is power what you're looking for?
consistency.
consistency. That's the word.
Are-
Because redundancy and consistency are very, very closely linked, but they're not quite the same thing. Redundancy leads to consistency.
Yeah. And so explain.
Yeah, basically, so we talked about it a little bit earlier, redundancy, just having a lot of the same effect. Mistrace being our prime example.
Not needing to draw one of your 3-ofs every game. or
Exactly. Because if let's say our plan is to cast a spell that deals direct damage to our opponent's Nexus. If the only spell we have in the game is Decimate, that effect's just not very good because it's the only spell in the game that does that, right? But if we suddenly have Noxian Fervor, we
Mystic
have
Shot.
Exactly, Mystic Shot, we have Get
Imperial
Excited.
Demolitionist. Yeah.
We have all these effects that deal direct damage to our opponent's Nexus. Every single one gets better because
It's a plan now. Because now
Exactly.
that can be your deck's plan. Before, Decimate was, this is how my aggro deck finishes the game sometimes. And now it can be, my plan is to start chump blocking with my creatures past turn 5 and just point things at their face.
I think that the
Exactly.
key to a good deck is the word plan. I think that the number one thing that your deck has to have to be good is a good plan.
and that's exactly where I was. So I said simplicity. That's where I was kind of leading into with that as well. A lot of people, I think a trap a lot of people fall into with when they see a new card and evaluate it, they think, oh, this card's really good if I have this card and this other card that does another thing, and then I have to draw this other card. Like they jump through all these hoops and they say, well, if I draw this set of 4 specific cards in this specific
It's
order.
Exodia, yeah. It's like we don't need to assemble Exodia here, you know?
Right.
On turn 7, my opponent kills my champion and I rekindle it back and play a missed call, and then it's over.
A great example is when people were playing Karma with Dawn and Dusk. Like you need
Or
to
go get it.
right. You need to get your Karma. You need to get to 10 mana, level
your
up your
Karma.
Karma, play your Dawn and Dusk on your kegs that you somehow got. That's the deck I was thinking about.
Yeah.
The one where you make a
million kegs.
12,000
kegs.
kegs.
Yeah.
You know,
And then just like one shot
and
them.
that's just so many hoops to jump through. Why are you doing all of that?
Yeah.
And the answer is usually because it's fun and awesome to make 12,000 kegs. But
Yeah,
is it
got a point
good?
there.
And the answer was no, it's not really that good because there's so many other things that are faster and better.
Yeah, and I
So
think
how simple is your plan?
Yeah.
Your plan, if your plan is
control,
point damage at your
aggro,
opponent's face?
mid-range are great places
I actually
to
think
start.
this happens so often in this game. And I think it's the reason, the key to a very specific matchup. I think it's the reason that Go Hard is favored against these random invoke mid-range decks. And I think it's because this Go Hard deck is setting up a plan. It is setting up a powerful turn where it casts Ledros and then pack your bags, or where it casts spells and pack your bags, or when it cast pack your bags. Or, when you flip a Twisted Fate or a Gangplank and have very powerful turns. Well, the mid-range decks are just like playing a bunch of cards that are good on rate. And yes, they make more cards that are pretty good on rate, but a lot of those are really expensive. And you just get outmaneuvered because they're building towards this pivot turn where they massively swing the game.
Yeah.
And you just playing, even if they're very good, 5 mana, 4/5 tough and lifesteal, you're going to lose at that pivot point because you can't heal over
Yeah.
20. There's a limited to the amount of mana you can have in a turn.
A 1 mana a 1 mana card that says deal 5 damage to every single one of your opponent's creatures and their face swings the game
So hard.
so hard
Yeah.
that you just need to
I also think that the TF Go Hard deck in and of itself is actually a great example of consistency versus redundancy, because redundancy, the actual TF Go Hard deck, I don't think is all that redundant. I mean, a lot of the cards say draw a card and they're like essentially redundant in function, but it makes the deck incredibly consistent. I think the biggest advantage that the TF Go Hard deck has is that it is the most consistent deck in the game. It's going to execute its plan almost every game. Its plan is cast pack your bags, basically. That's the deck's plan, really.
Yeah. And
Like
it's super simple.
There's a lot of bows and ribbons on it, but it's
There's a lot of things that
consistently
surround
going
that
to
that
cast
make it
pack your
good.
bags.
It's like around that, there's also, you're playing a bunch of like very low cost creatures and you're like death by 1,000 cuts them on
Yeah.
the way, which like levels GP, and also sometimes you randomly level Twisted Fate, but
Also-
ultimately you want to cast the card pack your bags.
Also, this is a card game, and in a card game, drawing cards is good. That's part of your simple plan.
That's true.
That's it.
Yeah.
The steps that lead into the execution of your plan, in and of itself, is also just a good thing to be doing in this game.
Yeah, their 3/2 has a keyword. My 2/2 draws a card. If they trade, I am up. I have gained an advantage.
yeah,
That's-
or
that's the
even
plan.
and here's an even more enlightening take, I think. If your opponent plays a 5/5 and you play, for example, a 2/2 that draws a card, a 1 mana 1/2 that draws a card, and a 2/2 that draws a card, and you trade all three of them with your opponent's 5 mana 5/5, you win
You are
even on
up.
mana and you're up a card.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of the simplicity of the deck's plan.
Yeah.
Right. And it is the most consistent in the game at executing its primary plan, I believe, between Zap, Spray Fin, and just the pure, sheer
draw.
amount of
Zap,
cards
spray
that you
fin,
can draw.
glimpse, salvage.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it really does execute its plan phenomenally.
Which is why it was so easy why I thought it was so crazy. I was like, there is no way Ledros is good in that deck. And then I put it in the deck and I was like, oh, you always draw it. You have infinite stuff to do before then, so it never clogs up your hand because you're going through so much of your deck. So drawing 1 9-mana card on turn 3 doesn't matter that much.
Yep.
And then you always get to the point where it cast it, and it's very good.
Yeah, and I think so to tie it all back to what makes a deck good, because I think we got a little off topic there, a little rambly. I think that what makes a deck good is, 1, having a good plan, and 2, being able to execute that plan. I think that those are the two things
Consistently.
At its
that make
core,
a deck
that is
good.
the simplest way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of pieces that go into what is my plan, and I guess there's 3 is my plan is good. Yeah. I need to 1 have a plan, 2 be able to execute my plan, and 3 have my plan be good.
So that last part is why decks that are good can sometimes be bad choices. So sometimes a deck that is
For sure.
good, that has a good plan and is good at executing that plan does not line up well against the rest of the field. For example, Tom Kent Soraka.
Perfect. That's
has
exactly the example I was gonna use. Yep.
Few 3-power creatures that when Mistrace is the best aggro deck, that matchup is basically unlosable because literally none of their creatures can block Tom Kent Sorakas.
Yep.
And they have to use like Pale Cascades every time they want to block, or Bastions.
Or draw all 3 of their Boxtopuses.
Yeah, stuff like
Or
that.
Shakedown,
right?
yeah.
And that plan is also not good when your opponent is casting 6/6s instead of 3/2s, because it's much harder to heal your Tahm Kench through eating them, and the deck doesn't apply that much pressure. So sometimes your plan's not good. Sometimes your plan is 1 toughness creatures, and you know what? Make it rains in the format, and you have to
And your
pack
plan's
your
not
bags
good.
on that one.
Yeah, and you have to pack your bags on that one. So I think that is a pretty good segue into our second viewer question, which is a lot of people. This is from Roomba Whack. I hope I pronounced that correctly on Discord. A lot of people have thought of this meta as one of the best Runeterra has seen. While I don't necessarily disagree, it seems like Gohard and Esdraven are essentially tier 0, especially on Master's Ladder, where they combine to be so far ahead of everything else that it is good but not great. Or, excuse me. So, I think there's a typo. So, it combines to be so far ahead of everything else that is good but not great. Do you agree, or am I totally off my rocker?
So this meta is really interesting to me because I was very frustrated in this meta because it felt too balanced. It felt like I couldn't find a deck that was going to be positioned well because it changed too often, and because there were like 10 viable decks. And that is a huge sign of health, all of those different things and the really even matchup tables. But it is really frustrating when you're trying to grind. Then I found Gohard, and the win rate was insane. So I can honestly see what they're talking about. I think something that's important about this game, especially because the way it is primarily played is on ladder, is that you want to find decks are good at different times, different like week-long periods. Like I was crushing with Shen Fiora because Feel the Rush is favored, I think, against both the decks that person mentioned.
Yeah, Esdraven and TF Gohard, I agree.
So people were playing Feel the Rush to beat that, and I was leveling them again and playing Fiora, and then I ran into like 2 Feel the Rush decks in a row and then ended up with a 6-0.
Yeah, I think that, interestingly enough, so I do, to be clear, I think that both TF Gohard and Esdraven are clearly meta decks that are very good. I think that at the time, that was right around at the end of the season when the cutoff was happening, and a little bit after, was when we were experiencing that cyclical meta, exactly what Noble was talking about. And I think that right around that time was exactly the time when Twisted Fate, Gohard, and Ezreal Draven spiked the like highest win rate, the best possible position for the decks. They had a lot of good matchups that were floating around on ladder, and they were really strong, and the meta adapts so fast that the meta adapts so fast that those became the most popular decks essentially very quickly. And I think that cycle was the end of the season, basically.
It was the peak of this meta.
Yeah, it was the peak of this meta.
And I want to say, when there are 10 viable decks, because I think there are, because, we can talk about Zombie Anivia, we can talk about, Ash Sedge, potentially Lee Sin, we can talk about Fiora Shen, we can talk about all of these invoke control decks, Vimer,
all the aggro decks,
Mist Wraiths,
there's
Pirates,
a lot
Scouts sometimes, discard aggro. Like, that's a lot of decks. And I think that it was really important that when this settled, and after a really long time, over time, it felt like those two were the best decks because they were doing that thing that we were just talking about. They were consistent. They drew a lot of cards.
They're both the most consistent deck.
It's really good at transforming, and they have, when they look at their whole deck or see very large portions of their deck, they have a consistent finisher, Captain Farron or Commander Ledros, and they have a lot of ways to interact with your opponent, and they're also leveling champions like Twisted Fate or Ezreal.
And they have a way to turn the corner very efficiently, which is pack your bags.
So, pack your bags, or
Commander
Captain
Ledros,
Farron, or
Farron.
flipped Ezreal. They were really important. They were consistent. So when there were so many things going on, when there were very even matchup tables, they just executed their game plan more consistently than their opponents, and it made it so their bad matchups were better than they would otherwise be because they were more consistent than that deck at executing their plan, and their good matchups even better than they would normally be because they so consistently did the innate thing about their deck that is good against the other deck.
Yeah, I want to summarize my thoughts on this question with I believe that he's correct. I think that TF Gohard and Ezreal Draven are the two best decks. But I will add a big but here. I think they're very attackable. I think tier 0 is the wrong place to put them. I don't think there are any tier 0 decks. I think that they're at the top of tier 1 because of their consistency, but they still have bad matchups. They can still be attacked, and I don't think that they're oppressive. So while I do think that they're probably the best objective decks, because they're so good at executing their plan and their plan is good, And I don't think that will ever really change.
I lose the most unlosable decks games as Draven. You like blow them out,
you
and
just
then like
lose.
at
You just
turn
get
5,
killed sometimes.
You
Yeah,
just like pass back and forth, and like you're both at relatively high life totals, and then like, and I'm like ahead on board, and they haven't played a unit for like 3 turns, and then somehow I lose.
just lose.
Yeah, the deck is just very consistent.
Do you have anything you want to add, Hugh, before we move on?
Not really. I mean, the only thing I was thinking about when you were talking was just a small thing. This is an online card game with a big community, and people communicate all the time about what's good and what's the best deck. And the moment that someone says, here's the best deck, how many people see that and say, ooh, that's the best deck, I'm gonna build that deck?
Oh, so many.
And like, you have to think about,
Mistrace was the best deck, and then you play against Soraka Kench, which was supposed to be good against it, and they play 3 shakedowns and you lose.
Yeah.
right, and how many times basically there's this weird positive feedback loop of, if people see this as the best deck, they start playing that deck, and when there's, I don't know, a ton more people playing a certain deck, its numbers are going to get kind of inflated or skewed a little bit if there's just way more people playing the quote-unquote best deck.
Yeah, absolutely. And it also innately brings the power level of the best deck down, usually. So, like, play rate is something that artificially lowers win rate. As like a stat, from like a stats perspective. So when you're looking at win percentages, stats, wherever you find them, you also really want to look at like how popular is the deck, because the more popular a deck is, if half of the players on ladder, for an extreme example, if half of the players on a ladder are playing Mistrace, for example, then the deck will automatically approach a 50% win rate,
because they're playing against each other,
because there's so many mirrors, and because the general population is not specializing in it, right? It takes probably, let's say it takes 10 games to become to have the highest possible win rate with a deck. Obviously this is an example,
like,
and
it's actually like 50 or something.
It's probably actually like a 500, but like, let's say it's 10, right? You play your first game, you're going to have a lower win rate than you should, because you're not familiar with the deck,
like
and that's
35% winner.
Yeah, and that's going to be true for every single person that picks up the deck and has to go through the first 10 games to be proficient with it. So higher play rate means an artificially deflated win rate. And I also think that Esdraven and Twisted Fate have a very high play rate, and as such have an artificially lower win rate than they otherwise maybe would, which I think is a factor.
Only really blew up from the online community. Like, I remember I was just like, we were playing in some meta. I think it was probably like around the time Feel the Rush got mega nerfed and like Lee Sin changed.
Yeah.
And someone posted a deck, and they were like, this is a deck I'm playing. I call it Poker Face. And it was like card for card TF Go Hard. And someone posted it on Reddit.
And then
that was the first I'd ever seen of it. I crafted it. I played a couple of games. I was like, this game's neat. It's not as good as this Feel the Rush thing I'm doing, or whatever. And then like maybe some cards got banned, or maybe people just refined the deck list, and suddenly it's everywhere. And I was like, oh, like I was there for that guy's Reddit post that introduced this to a ton of people. Yeah. But it was, but at that point it had taken like 5 days for it to get caught on. And I don't know if that guy's like a really popular streamer or whatever.
Streamers can see it and try it, and then videos pick up traction and it blows up.
I mean, a similar thing happened to Esdraven. Like, people played Esdraven against me, and I was like, why aren't they playing Sway? And that deck's way better. And then
and then all of a sudden that deck explodes. I saw that too, and I was like, is this a thing? Like, that's something, when I see something new, I'm like, is this a thing? And then 2 days later, that question usually gets answered.
Yeah, and that deck, looking at that particular deck, is really interesting, because I think that deck was created because someone thought about the card Draven in a new way. I think someone went from, this card is an aggro card that does
rummage was the
attacks,
key, I think.
Yeah, that attacks and helps me discard cards and is discard outlet for the archetype. Instead, they're looking like, when I play this card and every time it strikes, it draws me a card. And how do I make it such that I can convert those cards, spinning axes, into real cards? And the answer was playing Rummage, playing
Zonite Urchin. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we should move on to our next question.
Absolutely.
This is from Dragon in the Discord. He says, now that we've seen more landmark cards, has your opinions on them changed? And which one do you think will be the best?
I think that there are some really interesting things about landmarks in this game. So I think one of the design constraints on this game is that you can only have 6 slots on your board. And when cards... and so there's an opportunity cost. And this is something I actually want to talk about when talking about evaluating card, but I forgot to. But
This is a great tie-in, yeah.
the opportunity cost of putting a card in your deck. So people look at this deck and it's like, sure, if I got to put this card in my deck, I would like to draw it. But like, what cards are you playing it over? Especially when slotting it into a new deck, what cards is it actually directly better than, and does playing that card instead make your deck better? And for landmarks, that it happens a lot that your board is full and that you need every unit on that board, and you need everything to be a unit. When you have a landmark in play, you're at an actual disadvantage, because at the end of the game, when all of your stuff is lined up, if they get to attack you with
Six things.
3/3s and you get to block with 5 3/3s, you're going to take 3.
Yep.
And usually this is a more extreme example when you have like some crappy creatures and they have like a bunch of 6/6s or whatever.
I've found the most applicable one is actually, once again, that Tom Rocca like Mistress matchup, where like a lot of the times you just like they have like 2 Star Springs and then you cast the Harrowing, and it's like it doesn't matter if they could block I'm always, you're at 5, like you can only have 4 creatures unless you have removal spells. Like you cannot get around this, right? You can never have more than these 4 creatures, so you aren't going to be able to block.
I think that a big part of what makes landmarks good is they need to be justifying their spot. They need to be I think the best ones we've seen so far has been Star Spring, almost undoubtedly, and it's only specifically in that deck. Noxray Arena is also a very powerful effect that saw some play, but has fallen out of favor in Ash Sejuani, which I don't know if it should have. And so it really needs to justify that spot, and Star Spring does it by being the actual way that deck wins the game. I can't actually think of other landmarks that we have currently that saw a bunch of play.
Yeah, it's basically only Star Spring.
And Vaults of Helia might be really good if it was a little more consistent and didn't take up a spot on your board in a deck that's trying to put a bunch of things on the board with like Rekindlers and Blighted Caretakers and stuff.
Yeah. So back to the original question. For a little direction here, what is your opinion on landmarks? Do you like the design space? Do you like the cards? Do you think they're a success?
I certainly like the design space. I don't like how hard they are to interact with currently, especially Star Spring, and I think that that's going to get fixed as more stuff comes out, and it's just kind of something that you have to deal with this release schedule. I think that's fine. I'm glad they're experimenting with new card types. It's certainly interesting. It's very interesting to evaluate them, especially against units. I love the design space, and I think some of these new ones are really, really neat. And I think some of them
what do you think about them in general, Hugh?
I think in general they're bad.
Okay.
I haven't.
Interesting.
Basically, like we just mentioned, Star Spring is really the only one that sees play.
Do you think that is a problem with the actual effects printed on the landmarks, or do you think it's a fundamental problem with the card type?
I think it's currently, I think it is more a problem of the effects printed on the landmarks.
Okay. And they do have to be careful with them, because if it's too good and they're hard to remove, it gets really annoying and oppressive.
Right. And then we get into this weird, awful design space where it's like, oh, we need to suddenly add a bunch more hate for landmarks.
And then landmarks become bad.
And then, and then it's just a whole cycle. Yeah. But like currently, I believe Star Spring's the only thing seeing play, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And once again, it takes a spot on your board. Like, I don't know.
Right. You think they're kind of bad?
I think they're kind of bad right now.
Interesting.
And I like them.
They're certainly very cool build-arounds.
Okay. Basically, the takeaway is this for me. I like landmarks, and I like what they're doing with landmarks, and I don't think really any of them other than Star Spring are good right now.
Okay. So I guess that segues straight into the second half of the question. What do you think's the best one? And I think that we can include all of the old ones here. So this is all of the new ones that have been spoiled, as well as all of the old ones that are already out. What do you think is the best landmark? Let's just go around the circle. Noble?
I'm going to say it's the new Freljord one that's 3 mana. It's called Scar Post.
The Scargrounds. The Scargrounds?
Yeah, I think that is the best one. I'm very excited to play it, to try with it. I don't actually haven't brewed that much historically in this game, and I'm going to start with this expansion because it's the first time we've been trying to really get competitive. And I'm definitely, that card is on my short list of things to build around.
Hugh?
Yeah, I still think it's probably Starspring. I don't see Scargrounds being impactful enough for the most part, and obviously I could be completely wrong, but
It's hard. Yep.
yeah, I will say I did not think of the self-harm, I shouldn't say self-harm, self-damage angle
Yeah.
with the creatures that
Enter the battlefield.
The tile that builds water
Crusty
ones.
Codger and Boxtopus and all that, and Lounging Lizard especially. I didn't
Fortune
think about.
Croaker.
Fortune Croaker. That is an angle I didn't think about at all, and I really, really like that method of making this card good. And I think if this card will be good, that is the way it will be done. Not through the Vlad cards, not through the Scarthane, Stefan, Freljord buffed when you get damaged cards.
Yeah, I mean, you're still probably going to play those cards because the card is in Freljord.
Totally. But I think that the all-stars of the deck will be things like Fortune
sure.
Croaker and Lounging Lizard and Boxtopus.
I'm gonna go with Noble here. I think that the best one will be the Scargrounds. I think that it'll be better than Starspring. I still think it'll only probably see play in a single archetype, which I think is almost going to be ubiquitously true of landmarks in general, which I think is a general design problem with them.
I do think that that's good, though, because I don't want there to be a landmark that's super ubiquitous.
Interesting. Regardless, I think that the Scargrounds will be good, and I think that deck may or may not be better than Tom Raka. I don't really know, but I'm at least going to be the optimist on it. And I'll take that card's good. I'm excited to see it, at least.
Cool.
All right, we have one more listener question that we'll go through real quick to end it off. This is from Scoot Sable on Twitter. He asks, what are your favorite pet decks? Let's start with you this time.
Ooh. So, my favorite pet deck is...
I don't think it has to be like a not meta deck either. I think it could be a meta deck. Probably. It's just like
I have one. No,
Yeah,
I
go.
do have one. It's just it's more of a thought experiment currently.
Hit us.
Yeah. So basically, the version of this deck that I think could actually be good. It's currently not good. It's a bad deck right now.
That's fine.
Let's just make that.
Doesn't have to be
very,
good.
You can stop beating
very
around the bush.
clear.
Just tell us what the deck is.
It's absolutely terrible. It's a bad version of a Lee Zed,
Okay.
where basically my plan is, you know how I mentioned how I
Oh, is it that Mountain Gut deck?
yeah, you know how I mentioned I frequently beat people to death with a souped up mountain goat?
Yes.
I wanted to see if I could make that plan good and consistent. And the answer so far has been no.
Are you cutting Lee Sin and Zed from your deck?
Sometimes.
That's a long pause, you.
All right. So maybe this new new elusive lifesteal one is going to be where it's at.
So my thought process for this is based on the deck Boggles from Magic.
Okay.
For anyone who doesn't know what that is,
Okay.
there's a 1/1 creature for 1 mana in Magic that says hexproof, basically.
Yeah, can't be targeted.
Can't be targeted. It has spell shield that
By your
doesn't
opponents.
go by
By
your
your
opponent's
opponents.
stuff. Exactly. It has spell shield that cannot go away.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is basically
all it
how
is.
you put that. Is the best parallel to this game. So picture a creature with infinite spell shield. It's a 1 mana 1/1. What do you do with it? You put all of the buffs on it.
Zenith
So we're just
Blade.
trying to suit up a goat and ship it in.
Exactly. Except that goat can't get hit with a vengeance or mystic shot or anything else that could target
Except
it.
Hush. Oh, I guess
No,
Hush doesn't
nah,
have
spell shield.
because it has spell
Shield
shield.
works, yeah.
And that's
okay.
the thing. And so my thought was when I saw a way to actually give a creature spell shield consistently in that we have Spacey Sketcher, we have Zoe, we have
Giddy
Glittering
Sparkologist and Bastion.
Exactly. And that's why I mentioned that earlier in the episode, because I was thinking about my
Code up.
This
awful-
is Fledgling Stellacorn. It is your time. It innately has spell shield. That's OP.
yeah. And the deck is of course called the Goat because
Of course, yeah. It's
That
obvious,
is
really.
excellent. That is
Yeah.
an excellent.
and I saw those cards plus the 2 mana 1/2 elusive lifelink, because the biggest problem I've constantly run into is I get my creature, whatever it happens to be, whether it's a goat, whether it's a
Eye of the Dragon. Still playing that card?
No, because I don't want the deck to be good. Because I'm
You
trying
gotta
to
keep this one in the normal bracket. Eye of the Dragon's too good.
Eye of the Dragon is entirely too good.
Don't take this one into ranked.
I have won many ranked games with it, weirdly enough.
Interesting.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. That's what I like to hear.
Anyway, basically, I saw that card and was like, well, this is everything my deck needed, because the problem with the deck is that I die a little too quickly. And as soon as you have a 7-power elusive lifelinker, you can't really die.
Yeah.
True. Very true.
That's when you stabilize, and then you can start, and that's a clock. That's like a 2-turn clock.
All right. I think that my favorite pet deck is the Starlit Seer Fizz Bilgewater Freljord deck. It's really sweet. It just makes huge fizzes, and like it's really inconsistent and not very good, I don't think, but like actually just playing the 2-drop and then just like Omen Hawk and then spiking your like 9-power fizz and playing it and watching your opponent like look at Vengeance in their hand while you're like staring them down with Elixir of Iron, like do it, it's just leads to some absolutely comical games where you're like your opponent's like, I can never lose, and then you're like, here's this flipped 10-power fizz that's gonna kill you next turn, and they're like, what? Like, I wasn't ready for that.
Excuse me?
Like, come on, man. I think that deck's really sweet. I don't think it's very good. I've played it a little bit since the ladder cutoff, basically. Since I didn't
love
care.
the ladder cutoff.
Yeah.
Now Masters
Since I-
is just
yes.
whatever the hell you want.
Since I stopped caring, essentially.
Haven't seen a tier 1 deck since I've been playing.
Yeah,
on there,
no, not
basically,
at all.
yeah.
No, everybody's messing around playing their favorite pet decks. That's mine, and it got the upside of probably being a little bit better than the GOAT, at least. What about you,
Most
Noble?
things
I
are.
have like 7 answers to this question.
Oh, Lord.
Which is weird because I mostly play tier 1 decks. I like looked through my list of decks that I had and I was like, not a single one of these can be considered jank. At the beginning of playing this game in beta, I really liked playing elusives. I know that makes me a terrible person. I just very much enjoyed the deck. I want to make that deck good again. I had a theory. Most of my decks are theories. They're things that I haven't put together. For example, I think Vaults of Helia is a really cool card and would love to play like an aristocratic kind of deck, especially with like Dawn Speakers is one of my favorite cards in
Sounds
Demacia.
pretty sweet.
Which
I
is
love
like,
Dawn Speakers.
and so Dawn Spiders being one of the first competitive decks, and super cool. I also like the card They Who Endure a lot. That card's just sick. I played a lot of Icy Spiders.
Yeah, any deck with They Who Endure an Atrocity gets a win from me.
Yeah. But I think most recently, the one that I've played the most is a Leona Aesol Demacia deck, which is not hugely pet decky, but I've really been enjoying the synergy between the Daybait cards, like single combat with Solari Shieldbearer, and like figuring out whether or not I want to play the Allegiance Invoke card, how much Invoke stuff I want to play.
I really like that deck. I think it's a blast.
And at this point, my new favorite pet decks are all theoretical, including putting Zoe in that deck and Zoe Victor and Victor piles, and that I'm very, very excited to try and have resolved to actually try for once instead of waiting for people to figure out what's good and playing that. And then I think my favorite deck that I've played consistently is TF Swain. Kegs are just awesome. I just like kegs.
I love that
I
deck.
like Swain.
Yeah.
It's just super cool.
All right. Anything else? Any
Oh,
final
I have
thoughts?
one more. And this
one
is
more?
the one I was going to play.
Perfect.
So this deck started out as Ezreal TF, playing very, very few Piltoverns on cards. It was like Mystic Shots, and this was in Make It Rain was good. And I played a couple games of the deck and caught an Ezreal for a Gangplank, and then the next game I drew the Gangplank, and then I played the Gangplank. And then after that game, I cut the other 2 Ezreals for Gangplanks. This is the deck that taught me that the card Gangplank was good, which is not something that I necessarily believed before. Because I was like, it's just a 5/5 for 5, and it like makes a keg that's pretty vulnerable.
Card plays way better than
And then
it
you
reads.
like, so this deck is based around flipping it as quickly as possible. We're playing actual Warning Shot. We're playing 3 Yordle Grifters. Very few Piltoverns on cards. You can also play Noxus cards, and 3 of the copies of the card Riptide Rex, and is just trying to very efficiently kind of like beat down, get in damage every turn with Twisted Fate and Warning Shots, and then eventually flip your Gangplank and kill them.
I remember when you told me about this deck, and I also tried it, and I also love this
It's so
deck.
sick.
It's
Yeah.
super fun, and it also just like won a bunch of games.
Yeah, no, it had a very good win rate for a while.
I think when I stopped playing the deck, I had like 45 games on it. I had like 70% win rate.
Yeah.
That being said, I was in like high gold, low plat, but like
Yeah,
still.
Still,
maybe
yeah.
it's time again. Who knows? I'll definitely be brewing with
It
it.
easily
with some
could
new
be.
cards.
Yeah. All right. And I think that unless anyone has anything they want to follow up with, I think that we've probably reached the end of today's episode. So I want to thank you all for listening to another episode of Champ Select. If you want to hear more from us, join our Discord. You'll see the link in the description below. Follow us on Twitter. We'll be polling Discord and Twitter for more questions in the future, potentially.
Yeah,
let
absolutely.
Us, yeah,
I think
let
we
us,
hopefully will make that a segment that happens at the end of almost every episode.
Let us know if you guys liked any of the segments, particularly the viewer questions episode, because we're thinking about doing that quite a bit more. So if you guys like that, make sure you let us know in the comments, Discord, Twitter, anything like that. I think that this is the last you'll hear of us for before the holidays. So happy holidays to everyone. And I think we'll talk to you all in the new year.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. The only thing that I would note is that we're, like we said, the schedule's a little tumultuous coming up. This will come out on Wednesday, and then we will probably figure out one thing to do for y'all even while we're separated over the Christmas break, and then start up again.
Yeah, so maybe look for polls or whatever to vote on what you think
we'll
do.
our best.
We'll
see
figure
what
something
happens. Out. Yeah,
and
exactly.
You're listening to this probably on YouTube, and then we're currently in the process of, hopefully you'll be able to listen to this episode over break on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We're kind of increasing our reach like that, and May, when we do that, phase out SoundCloud. So let us know if the SoundCloud is your preferred way to listen, and we'll keep that going for you.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. Anyway, thank you all so much for listening, and we will see you on the next episode of Champ Select. Have a good day.